The wedding reception was a masterpiece of elegance and extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the grand ballroom, their reflections dancing on the polished marble floor. Guests in designer suits and gowns laughed and clinked their champagne glasses, celebrating the union of Amelia, a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of grace, and Thomas, her dashing and successful groom. The room was alive with joyful chaos, music, laughter, and the occasional burst of applause from a table of slightly tipsy guests. Yet, to the keen observer, something felt off. There was a tension beneath the surface, a subtle unease that didn't belong in such a celebration. Detective Olivia Liv Hayes stepped into the ballroom, her presence an immediate contrast to the glittering opulence around her. Dressed in a practical black pantsuit with her badge clipped to her belt, she exuded a calm authority that silenced conversations as she walked by. She had been called by a frantic 911 operator, an urgent and cryptic report of a bride gone missing from her own reception. Liv was meticulous, observant, and unshakably determined. She scanned the room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail: the overturned chairs, the shattered champagne flutes near the edge of the dance floor, the smudged lipstick on the rim of a glass left abandoned on a table. Then there was the most telling clue, a trail of scattered white rose petals leading toward the exit, ending abruptly with a single, custom-made diamond earring lying on the ground. The groom, Thomas, stood near the head table, his face pale and drawn. He was surrounded by concerned family members and wedding guests, all speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of panic. Liv approached him, her notepad ready. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice firm but calm, "I need you to tell me everything you know. When did you last see Amelia?" Thomas turned to her, his distress palpable. "She was just here," he stammered, his hands trembling slightly. "One moment we were cutting the cake, and the next, she was gone." His voice cracked, and he ran a hand through his neatly styled hair. "I don't understand. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives." Liv's eyes narrowed as she noticed something odd. Thomas wasn't wearing his wedding ring. It was a small detail, but one that gnawed at her instincts. A man who had just exchanged vows and rings earlier in the day should still have it on. Was it nerves, or was there something more to his distress? She filed the observation away for later. Her attention shifted to the earring on the floor. She crouched to pick it up, holding it delicately with a gloved hand. It was an exquisite piece, custom designed and likely worth thousands of dollars. "This doesn't look like something someone would just drop and not notice," Liv murmured to herself. She examined the clasp. It hadn't broken. It had been removed, purposefully or in haste. The wedding planner, a frazzled woman with a clipboard clutched tightly to her chest, approached Liv hesitantly. "I don't understand how this could have happened," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything was going perfectly. I mean, there was one new staff member we hired last minute, but..." She trailed off, her brow furrowing. "I didn't notice anything strange. I swear." Liv's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of information. A missing bride, a frantic husband, a new staff member who might not even belong. It didn't feel random. Someone had planned this, she was sure of it. But the question was who, and why? She immediately requested all the security footage from the venue, enlisting the help of the event staff to retrieve the recordings. "I need a list of every employee working tonight," she instructed the planner. "And I want names, addresses, and phone numbers for everyone." Her tone left no room for argument. Back at the precinct, Liv dove into her investigation. She had her team run background checks not just on Amelia and Thomas, but on every member of the wedding party. If someone close to the couple had orchestrated this, she needed to know who they were and what their motives might be. The results began to trickle in. Amelia's record was spotless, a picture-perfect life on the surface. But a deeper dive revealed that her family was drowning in debt, struggling to maintain the image of wealth they had cultivated for decades. Thomas, on the other hand, had a much more troubling history. Liv's eyebrows knit together as she read the file on his previous wife, a woman who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. No body was ever found, and while Thomas had been a suspect, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. The case had gone cold. Liv leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. 2 wives, 2 disappearances. This wasn't a coincidence. Thomas's polished exterior hid something dark, something sinister. And now Amelia might suffer the same fate, unless Liv could stop it. As she delved deeper, she discovered a chilling pattern. Several of Thomas's former business partners had also vanished over the years, their disappearances conveniently timed with financial disputes or legal battles. He had a way of making people disappear, leaving no trace behind. Liv's gut told her that Amelia was just another pawn in his twisted game, but she needed proof. She brought Thomas in for questioning, determined to break through his composed facade. He sat across from her in the sterile interrogation room, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I told you, I don't know where she is," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "Why aren't you out there looking for her instead of wasting time accusing me?" Liv leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You were married before, weren't you? What happened to your first wife, Thomas?" His jaw tightened, and he looked away. "That was a long time ago," he said flatly. "I barely remember her." The lie was obvious, and Liv didn't let it slide. "You barely remember the woman you were married to? That's convenient." She let the silence hang in the air, watching as his composure began to crack. Meanwhile, Liv's team reviewed the security footage from the wedding. They found something peculiar, a shadowy figure entering the ballroom through a side door, carrying what appeared to be a large duffel bag. The figure's face was obscured, but a distinctive tattoo on their arm caught Liv's attention. She had the tech department enhance the footage, zooming in on the intricate design. The tattoo matched one associated with a local biker gang known for illegal activities, including human trafficking. Liv's heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was part of something much larger, much darker. She wasted no time. Armed with a location tied to the gang's operations, she assembled a team for a raid. They moved quickly, breaching the abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. The place was eerily quiet, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. The gang had cleared out, leaving behind only a few old bikes and a stack of papers on a battered table. Liv sifted through the documents, her breath catching as she found detailed information on Amelia's family finances. There were also payment records showing that Thomas had wired money to the gang just weeks before the wedding. He had orchestrated this entire ordeal, using the gang as his enforcers. But why? The answer came in the form of a hidden ledger, listing assets tied to Amelia's family. Liv realized Thomas wasn't just after control, he was after money. Amelia was a means to an end, her family's wealth a prize he had been planning to claim for years. Flashbacks filled Liv's mind as she pieced together the timeline. Thomas had been stalking Amelia, studying her vulnerabilities, crafting the perfect plan to manipulate her into trusting him. The wedding was never about love. It was a calculated move in a long game of greed and domination. Liv returned to the precinct, more determined than ever. She confronted Thomas, laying out the evidence in front of him. For the first time, his mask of composure slipped. He leaned back in his chair, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You think you've figured it all out," he said, his voice low and mocking. "But you have no idea what you've stepped into." Before Liv could respond, Thomas lunged. The room erupted into chaos as officers restrained him, his desperation turning to violence. Liv's heart pounded as she realized just how dangerous he was. The case culminated in a final confrontation in the precinct parking garage. Thomas, cornered and unhinged, pulled a gun, threatening to take everyone down with him. Liv's training kicked in as she took cover, her mind racing for a way to defuse the situation. In the end, it was Thomas's own hubris that led to his downfall. He miscalculated, turning the gun on himself in a final act of defiance. The sound of the shot echoed through the garage, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. As Liv stood over his lifeless body, she felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at a cost. Amelia was safe, but the scars of Thomas's actions would linger. The city began to wake as Liv walked out of the garage, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. She knew her work wasn't done. Another case would come, another mystery to unravel. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, knowing she had done everything she could to bring justice to those who needed it most. The morning air was crisp as Liv stepped out of the precinct's parking garage, her mind still racing with the events of the night. The weight of the case lingered heavily on her shoulders, even though justice, in a way, had been served. Thomas was gone, and Amelia was safe, but safe didn't mean unscarred. Liv knew from experience that some wounds ran too deep to fully heal, and Amelia's life would never return to the fairy tale she'd imagined when she'd walked down the aisle. Liv climbed into her car, letting out a long, steadying breath as she gripped the steering wheel. The city stretched out before her, bathed in the soft orange glow of sunrise. It looked peaceful, almost serene, but Liv knew better. Somewhere, in the labyrinth of streets and alleys, another crime was brewing, another victim was in danger. The fight against darkness never truly ended, and she wasn't naive enough to think it ever would. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, breaking her moment of reflection. She glanced at the screen and saw Dana's name flashing. Dana, her trusted tech analyst and one of the few people Liv could count on to always have her back. Liv picked up the phone, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Hayes." "Liv," Dana began, her tone a mix of relief and urgency. "I've been going over everything from last night, Thomas's records, the biker gang connections, the payments. There's something you need to see." Liv frowned, her instincts kicking in. "I thought we had everything tied up. What did you find?" "I don't think this is over," Dana said, her voice tightening. "There's a pattern, Liv. The payments Thomas made to the gang? They weren't just a one-off deal. He's been funneling money to multiple groups, not just here but in other cities. And get this, some of those payments started before he even met Amelia." Liv's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You're saying this wasn't just about Amelia? That this goes deeper?" "I'm saying Thomas may have been part of something much bigger," Dana replied. "Something organized. I pulled some strings and dug into the biker gang's communications. They've been working with other groups, traffickers, financial scammers, even corrupt corporate networks. It's all connected, Liv." A chill ran down Liv's spine. She had thought Thomas was the mastermind, a lone predator driven by greed and control. But if what Dana was saying was true, he wasn't the top of the pyramid, he was just a piece of it. A pawn in a larger, more insidious game. "What's the end goal?" Liv asked, her voice low. "What were they after?" "I don't have the full picture yet," Dana admitted. "But it's big. Money laundering, coercion, exploitation, it's like they're creating a web to trap people. And Amelia's family wasn't the first target. There are others." Liv's mind raced as she processed the information. Thomas's death might have closed one chapter, but it had opened another. If this was as big as Dana suggested, then they were dealing with something far beyond a single missing bride. This was systemic, organized, and deeply entrenched. "Send me everything you've got," Liv said, starting her car. "Names, locations, leads. I'm not letting this slide." "Already on it," Dana replied. "But Liv, be careful. If Thomas was just a cog in the machine, whoever's running this won't take kindly to you digging around." Liv smirked, though there was no humor in it. "They'll have to get in line." She ended the call and headed toward the hospital. Amelia was still there, recovering from the ordeal. Liv needed to see her, not just to check on her well-being, but to ask more questions. If Amelia knew anything at all, that could help uncover the larger operation, Liv had to find it. The hospital was quiet, the sterile smell of disinfectant hanging in the air as Liv walked through the corridors. She found Amelia in a private room, sitting by the window with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, but she looked up as Liv entered. "You found him, didn't you?" Amelia asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Liv nodded. We did. Thomas won't hurt you, or anyone else, ever again. Amelia exhaled shakily, her hands clutching the edges of the blanket. I don't understand. I thought he loved me. I thought I knew him. You couldn't have known, Liv said gently, pulling up a chair beside her. People like Thomas are good at hiding who they really are. But I need your help, Amelia. I need to know if there's anything you remember, anything unusual he said or did, that might give us a clue about what he was involved in. Amelia frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to recall. He would get these calls sometimes, she said slowly. Late at night. He'd step out of the room to take them, and when he came back, he'd act different. Tense. I asked him about it once, but he just said it was work. Did he ever mention names? Places? Liv pressed. Amelia shook her head. No. But there was this one time. He left his laptop open, and I saw an email. It was from someone named Morrison. The subject line said something about a shipment. When I asked him about it, he closed the laptop and got angry. He said I shouldn't be snooping. Liv's pulse quickened. Morrison. Do you remember anything else about the email? Dates, details? I'm sorry, Amelia said, her voice trembling. I don't. I didn't think much of it at the time. Liv placed a reassuring hand on Amelia's arm. You've been through enough. I'll take it from here. As Liv left the hospital, she called Dana again. I need you to run a search on the name Morrison. Cross-reference it with Thomas's financial records, the biker gang, anything. On it, Dana replied. I'll call you as soon as I find something. Liv's gut told her she was getting closer to the truth, but she also knew the closer she got, the more dangerous things would become. Whatever this operation was, it had the resources to bury its secrets, and anyone who got too close. Hours later, as Liv sat at her desk reviewing the case files, her phone buzzed. It was Dana. I found him, she said. Morrison is a fixer, someone who connects people like Thomas to criminal networks. He's been linked to several high-profile cases, but no one's ever been able to pin anything on him. Where is he? Liv asked. There's a warehouse downtown, Dana said. It's listed under a shell company tied to Morrison. If he's involved, that's where you'll find him. Liv grabbed her coat and badge, her determination renewed. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If Morrison was the key to unraveling the operation, she would find him. And she wouldn't stop until every last piece of the puzzle was exposed. As she drove toward the warehouse, the city lights blurred past her, a kaleidoscope of neon and shadow. The stakes had never been higher, but Liv wasn't afraid. She had faced darkness before and won. She would do it again. Because justice wasn't just her job, it was her mission. And she would see it through, no matter the cost. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal exterior blending into the industrial sprawl of the city's outskirts. Liv parked her car a block away, her senses on high alert as she approached on foot. This wasn't her first time walking into the unknown, but the weight of what she'd uncovered so far made her grip her holstered firearm just a little tighter. If Morrison was indeed the linchpin of this operation, she wasn't just hunting down a criminal, she was stepping into the heart of a conspiracy that had claimed countless lives. The area was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. Liv spotted a security camera mounted near the warehouse entrance, its lens sweeping back and forth in a slow, mechanical motion. She slipped into the shadows, her mind racing as she formed a plan. This wasn't a job for backup, not yet. She needed to assess the situation first, to understand just how deep this rabbit hole went. She found a side entrance, the door slightly ajar. It wasn't a good sign. Either someone was still inside, or they'd left in a hurry. Liv drew her weapon and pushed the door open cautiously, the hinges groaning loudly in the stillness. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of oil and mildew. Stacks of wooden crates lined the walls, each one marked with cryptic symbols and numbers. Her eyes scanned the room, every nerve in her body on edge. She moved silently, her boots barely making a sound against the concrete floor. As she approached a cluster of crates, she noticed a faint glow emanating from a laptop left open on a nearby table. The screen displayed a series of emails, and Liv's heart skipped a beat as she saw the name Morrison in the sender field. She holstered her weapon and leaned over the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she scrolled through the messages. They were encrypted, but even the fragments she could decipher told her enough. Mentions of shipments, targets, and coded locations painted a grim picture. This wasn't just about Amelia or Thomas, it was a sprawling operation, one that stretched far beyond the city. A sound, soft but distinct, cut through the silence. Liv froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her gun. Footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse, growing louder with each passing second. She quickly closed the laptop and stepped into the shadows, her breath steady as she prepared for whoever, or whatever, was coming. A man appeared, his silhouette sharp against the faint light filtering through the warehouse's high windows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his movements were confident, almost casual. Liv's eyes zeroed in on his arm, where a familiar tattoo snaked down to his wrist, the same design she'd seen on the security footage from the wedding. This had to be one of the bikers, or at least someone tied to their network. "Thought you'd be gone by now," the man muttered, his voice carrying just enough for Liv to hear. He wasn't talking to her, he was on a phone. "Yeah," Morrison said to clear out. "He's already moved the important stuff. I'm just grabbing the rest of the files." Liv's pulse quickened. If Morrison had cleared out, that meant he knew she, or someone, was closing in. She couldn't let this guy leave, not without answers. Before the man could react, Liv stepped out of the shadows, her gun trained on him. "Drop the phone. Hands where I can see them." The man froze, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of her. For a moment, he looked like he might comply. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, he bolted toward the nearest exit. Liv cursed under her breath and took off after him. The chase was chaotic, their footsteps echoing loudly as they weaved through the maze of crates and machinery. The man was fast, but Liv was faster. She closed the gap, tackling him to the ground just as he reached the door. "Get off me," he snarled, struggling against her grip. "Not until you tell me where Morrison is," Liv shot back, pinning him down. The man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you've got the upper hand? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Liv pressed her knee harder into his back, her voice cold and steady. "Try me." "You're too late," he spat. "Morrison's already gone. And even if you catch him, it won't matter. There's always someone else to take his place." Liv's jaw tightened. She knew he wasn't bluffing. This operation was bigger than Morrison, bigger than Thomas, bigger than anything she'd faced before. But that didn't mean she was giving up. She hauled the man to his feet and cuffed him, dragging him back toward the table with the laptop. "Sit," she ordered, shoving him into a chair. He glared at her, defiance written all over his face. "What now? You gonna beat the answers out of me?" Liv ignored the jab and turned her attention back to the laptop. She needed to find something, anything, that could lead her closer to Morrison. As she scrolled through the files, she came across a map marked with red pins. One of the locations was circled, the date December 10th scrawled next to it. That was tomorrow. "What's happening here?" she demanded, pointing to the map. The man smirked, his silence infuriating. Liv leaned in close, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you're protecting Morrison? He doesn't care about you. The second you screw up, you're expendable. So tell me what I need to know, or I'll make sure you go down for all of this." The man's smirk faltered, just for a moment. "It's a shipment," he muttered. "Big one. They're moving it tomorrow night. That's all I know." "What's in the shipment?" "People," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Women. Kids. They round them up, ship them off." I don't know where they go after that. Liv's stomach churned. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was a gut punch. This wasn't just about money or power, it was human lives, stolen and sold like commodities. Where's Morrison? She pressed. I told you, he's gone, the man said, frustration creeping into his voice. He doesn't stick around for this part. Liv wanted to slam her fist into the table. Morrison was slipping through her fingers, but the shipment wasn't. She could still stop it, still save the people being trafficked. She grabbed the man by the collar, her voice hard as steel. You're coming with me. And if you're lying, I swear. I'm not, he cut her off, his bravado cracking under the weight of her intensity. I'm telling you the truth. Liv didn't have time to second-guess him. She radioed for backup, relaying the location and details of the operation. They had less than 24 hours to prepare, and she wasn't going to waste a single second. As she escorted the man out of the warehouse, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just another case. This was war, a battle against a system designed to exploit the vulnerable and protect the powerful. And Liv wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to dismantle the entire rotten structure, piece by piece. Tomorrow night, they would make their move. And Liv would be ready. The next day passed in a blur of preparation, adrenaline, and relentless determination. Liv spent hours coordinating with her team, poring over the intelligence they'd gathered and mapping out every possible contingency. The location from the map, a seemingly abandoned shipping yard on the outskirts of the city, was their target. It was sprawling, with enough hiding spots and escape routes to make it a logistical nightmare. But Liv wasn't about to let that stop her. Lives were at stake, and failure wasn't an option. As the sun began to set, the team gathered in the operations room. The air was thick with tension as Liv stood at the head of the table, briefing her team. Dana had joined them, her laptop open as she displayed the layout of the shipping yard on the screen. We've confirmed that the shipment is scheduled to move at 11 p.m., Liv began, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. Based on the intel we've gathered, Morrison's people will use trucks to transport the victims. There are 3 main loading zones here, here, and here. She pointed to the map, her finger tracing the routes. We'll split into teams to cover all exits. No one gets in or out without our say-so. One of the officers, a burly man named Martinez, raised his hand. What about Morrison? Any chance he'll show up? Liv hesitated, her jaw tightening. It's unlikely. Morrison has a pattern of keeping his hands clean. But if he's there, we're bringing him in. Alive. The room was silent for a moment as her words sank in. Everyone knew the risks. This wasn't just a raid, it was a rescue mission. The people they were trying to save had endured unimaginable horrors, and the team's success would determine whether they lived to see freedom again. By the time they arrived at the shipping yard, the night was fully cloaked in darkness. The hum of the city seemed distant, replaced by the ominous creaks and groans of metal containers stacked high in uneven rows. Shadows stretched long and deep, creating an unsettling maze of steel and concrete. Liv adjusted her earpiece, her voice calm but firm as she checked in with the team. Team Alpha, take the north side. Beta, cover the east. Charlie, with me on the west. Eyes open, and no one moves until I give the signal. She moved with calculated precision, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she led her team toward the western loading zone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of water lapping against the docks. Liv's heart pounded in her chest, but her focus never wavered. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the yard, the unmistakable sound of a truck engine. Liv raised her hand, signaling her team to stop. She crouched behind a stack of crates, peering around the corner as the truck came into view. Its headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating a group of men standing near one of the containers. Liv's stomach tightened as she recognized the tattooed man from the warehouse among them. He was talking to another figure, someone taller and leaner, with a hood pulled low over their face. Liv strained to hear their conversation, her pulse quickening as she caught fragments of their exchange. Everything's loaded? The hooded figure asked. Almost, the tattooed man replied. We're just waiting on the last batch. They'll be here any minute. Liv's earpiece crackled softly as Dana's voice came through. Liv, I'm monitoring the area. I've got 2 more trucks approaching from the south. You've got about 10 minutes before they arrive. Understood, Liv whispered, her grip tightening on her weapon. She turned to her team, her voice low but urgent. We move now. Take positions, and be ready to intercept. The team fanned out, their movements silent and precise as they surrounded the loading zone. Liv's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the men by the truck, her mind racing through every possible outcome. She needed to act quickly, decisively, but she also couldn't afford to make a mistake. With a deep breath, she raised her hand and gave the signal. Chaos erupted. The team moved in like a well-oiled machine, their shouts cutting through the night as they ordered the men to stand down. The tattooed man reached for a weapon, but Liv was faster. She fired a warning shot, the crack of her gun freezing him in place. Don't even think about it, she growled, her weapon trained on him as she closed the distance. The hooded figure bolted, weaving through the maze of containers with surprising agility. Liv cursed under her breath and took off after them, her boots pounding against the pavement as she gave chase. Suspect fleeing west, she called into her earpiece, her breath coming in sharp bursts. I'm in pursuit. The figure was fast, but Liv's determination was unmatched. She pushed herself harder, her focus narrowing as she closed the gap. The figure darted around a corner, but Liv anticipated the move. She lunged, tackling them to the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of both of them. The hood fell back, revealing a sharp-featured man with piercing eyes that burned with defiance. Liv didn't recognize him, but something about his demeanor told her he was more than just a lackey. Who are you? She demanded, pinning him down. Where's Morrison? The man smirked, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You're too late, he sneered. You think taking me down will stop this? You're in over your head, detective. Liv tightened her grip, her voice cold and unyielding. We'll see about that. She hauled him to his feet, cuffing him as the rest of her team secured the area. The victims were found inside the containers, terrified, malnourished, but alive. Liv's chest tightened as she saw them, a mix of relief and fury coursing through her veins. These people had been treated like cargo, their lives reduced to dollar signs in someone else's ledger. As the suspects were loaded into police vehicles and the victims taken to safety, Liv stood in the middle of the chaos, her mind already racing to the next step. The man she'd captured wasn't Morrison, but he was close enough to know something. She would make sure he talked. Back at the precinct, Liv sat across from the man in the interrogation room, her gaze sharp and unrelenting. You have one chance to make this easier on yourself, she said. Tell me where Morrison is, or I'll make sure you take the fall for all of this. The man leaned back in his chair, his smirk returning. You don't get it, do you? Morrison isn't the top. He's just another piece. You think you've won tonight, but this is never going to stop. Liv's jaw tightened, her hands balling into fists under the table. She'd heard similar words from criminals before, but this time, they hit differently. This wasn't just about one man or one operation. It was a hydra, a beast with endless heads, each one ready to strike the moment another was cut off. But Liv wasn't deterred. She leaned forward, her voice steady and fierce. Then I'll keep cutting. One head at a time. The man's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly masked it with defiance. Liv leaned back in her chair, studying his body language. Every twitch, every shift of his gaze, told her more than his words ever could. This wasn't just a petty criminal. He was a cog in a much larger machine. And while he might not be at the top, he was close enough to know where the next thread of this tangled web led. You think you're above this, Liv said, her voice calm but cutting. You think Morrison, or whoever's running this, will protect you? Let me tell you what's going to happen. They'll cut you loose the second you're no longer useful. You're disposable. But me? I'm the one who can give you a way out. So, tell me, who's pulling the strings? The man's jaw tightened, his smirk fading for good. He looked away, his fingers twitching against the cuffs. Liv could see the war waging in his mind, defiance versus self-preservation. She decided to press harder. You were there tonight, she continued, her tone sharpening. You saw those people in the containers. Women. Children. Do you think that makes you untouchable? Because trust me, the courts won't see it that way. You'll go down for trafficking, conspiracy, kidnapping, every charge I can slap on you. And if you think Morrison's going to swoop in and save you, you're dumber than I thought. He glared at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, Liv thought he'd stay silent. Then, he exhaled sharply and muttered, You think you're so smart, don't you? Fine. I'll give you something. But it won't stop them. Liv's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression neutral. I'm listening. The man leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Morrison's working for someone bigger. Someone with money, power. They don't just run the operations, they control the supply chain. Fake IDs, offshore accounts, black market buyers. Morrison's just the middleman. Liv's stomach churned. She'd expected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her feel like she was staring into a void with no bottom. Names. Who's at the top? The man shook his head. I don't know. No one does. That's the point. Morrison's only ever mentioned one name, and I don't even think it's real. Kingfisher. That's what he called them. Said they're the ones who decide everything. Where the shipments go, who gets taken, what happens next. Kingfisher. The name sent a chill down Liv's spine, as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. It was a code name, obviously, but it was more than she'd had before. A direction. A lead. Where's Morrison now? She demanded. The man hesitated, then finally said, He's got a safe house. Downtown. An old brownstone on West 43rd. But you didn't hear that from me. Liv nodded, standing abruptly. She motioned for an officer to take the man back to holding, her mind already racing ahead. If Morrison was at that location, she couldn't waste another second. She had to move before he disappeared again. Dana met her near her desk, her face pale but determined. I heard the name Kingfisher, she said, holding up her laptop. I'm already digging into it, but it's going to take time. If this is as deep as it sounds, it won't be in any public databases. Keep it, Liv said, grabbing her gear. I'm heading to the brownstone. If Morrison's there, we'll bring him in. Liv, Dana said, her voice laced with concern, you're walking into something big. Be careful. If Morrison knows you're onto him, he won't go quietly. He never does, Liv replied grimly, heading for the door. The drive to West 43rd was tense, the city lights blurring past as Liv's mind ran through every possibility. Morrison was slippery, but this time, she wouldn't let him slip away. She parked a block away and approached the brownstone on foot, her hand resting on her holstered gun. The building was quiet, its windows dark, but Liv's instincts told her someone was inside. She signaled her backup team, who moved into position silently. Liv took the lead, her heart pounding as she breached the front door. The interior was eerily quiet, the smell of stale smoke and mildew hanging in the air. She moved carefully, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she cleared each room. Then she heard it, a faint creak, like the sound of a chair shifting. Liv froze, her weapon raised as she followed the noise to a room at the end of the hall. She pushed the door open and found herself staring at a man sitting casually in a worn leather chair, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. Morrison, she said, her voice cold. He looked up, his lips curving into a slow, condescending smile. Detective Hayes. Took you long enough. Liv's grip on her weapon tightened. You're under arrest. Morrison chuckled, taking a long drag of his cigarette before stubbing it out on the armrest. You think slapping cuffs on me is going to fix anything? You're playing checkers in a chess game, sweetheart. You have no idea what you're up against. Then enlighten me, Liv shot back. Tell me about Kingfisher. Morrison's smile faded, replaced by something darker. You don't want to go there. Trust me. Liv stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Try me. For a moment, Morrison said nothing. Then, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Kingfisher isn't a person. It's an idea. A network. You think you're chasing a man, but you're chasing smoke. By the time you figure it out, it'll be too late. Liv's stomach turned, but she kept her composure. Where's the next shipment going? Morrison shrugged, his expression maddeningly calm. Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. You shut down one lane, they open another. That's how this works. You can't stop it. We'll see about that, Liv said, motioning for her team to take him into custody. As they hauled him to his feet, Morrison smirked one last time. Good luck, detective, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. You're going to need it. As Liv watched him get loaded into the squad car, her mind churned with questions. Morrison was in custody, but his words lingered like a shadow. Kingfisher wasn't just a name, it was a threat, a promise that the fight was far from over. Back at the precinct, Liv stood over Dana's shoulder as her friend scoured database after database, searching for any trace of Kingfisher. Each dead end only fueled Liv's resolve. She didn't care how deep this went or how long it took. She would find them. Because no matter how far Kingfisher's reach extended, Liv was determined to cut it off at the source. One head at a time. The precinct hummed with quiet urgency as Liv paced back and forth in front of the evidence board. The faces of suspects, maps, and snippets of information were pinned in a chaotic collage of red string and hastily scribbled notes. In the center of it all was the name that now haunted her, Kingfisher. It was written in bold, all caps, circled and underlined multiple times. Around it were scattered pieces of the puzzle, Morrison's network, the biker gang, the shipment routes. Yet the picture was still incomplete. Dana sat at her desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she hacked into yet another encrypted database. She had been at it for hours, her coffee sitting untouched and cold beside her. Liv glanced at her, seeing the tension in her friend's shoulders, but knowing better than to interrupt. Dana worked best when she was in the zone, and if there was a clue to be unearthed, Liv trusted her to find it. Anything? Liv asked finally, breaking the silence. Dana didn't look up. Not yet. Whoever this Kingfisher is, or whatever it is, they've covered their tracks well. I've gone through offshore accounts, shell companies, encrypted emails. It's like chasing a ghost. Liv frowned, her jaw tightening. There has to be something. Morrison isn't smart enough to come up with this on his own. Someone's pulling the strings, and we need to figure out who before they disappear again. Dana sighed, leaning back in her chair and rubbing her temples. I'll keep digging. But Liv, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we might not find them. If this is as big as it seems, she trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Liv shook her head, her voice firm. No. We're not giving up. Not while there are still people out there suffering because of this. Dana gave her a weary smile. I didn't say we'd give up. Just, don't let it eat you alive, okay? Liv didn't respond. She couldn't. Because the truth was, this case was eating her alive. Every victim she'd seen in those shipping containers, every name she'd uncovered in connection to the operation, every dead end she'd hit, it all weighed on her like a crushing force. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Her phone buzzed on the desk, drawing her attention. She picked it up and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Her brow furrowed as she answered, her instincts immediately on high alert. Detective Hayes, she said. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice distorted by a voice modulator. Detective, you've been busy. Liv's blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. Who is this? The voice chuckled, low and menacing. Let's just say I'm someone who appreciates your persistence. Most people would have backed off by now. But not you. I admire that. Her grip on the phone tightened. If you know who I am, then you know I'm not stopping until I take you down. So why don't you save us both some time and tell me where to find you? The voice laughed again, the sound grating in her ears. You're bold, detective. I'll give you that. But you're in over your head. You have no idea how deep this goes. Kingfisher isn't something you can stop. It's bigger than you. Bigger than your entire department. Liv's jaw clenched, her pulse pounding in her ears. I've heard that before, she said coldly. And yet, here I am. There was a pause, and for a moment, Liv thought the caller might have hung up. But then the voice spoke again, softer this time. You want to find me? Fine. I'll make it easy for you. Come alone. No backup, no surveillance. Just you and me. I'll send you the coordinates. The call ended abruptly, leaving Liv staring at her phone in disbelief. A moment later, a text came through with a set of GPS coordinates. She quickly typed them into her computer, her heart pounding as the location appeared on the map. It was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. Dana noticed her expression and stood up, concern etched across her face. Liv? What is it? Liv hesitated, knowing what she was about to say would send Dana into a fit. I just got a call. From someone tied to Kingfisher. They want to meet. Dana's eyes widened. Are you serious? Liv, this is a trap. You know that, right? Of course it's a trap, Liv said, grabbing her coat. But it's also the best lead we've got. If I can get them to talk. Or they could kill you, Dana interrupted, stepping in front of her. You can't just walk into this alone. At least let me send a tracker with you or something. No, Liv said firmly. They'll know. If they think I'm bringing backup, they'll bolt. I have to do this their way. Dana crossed her arms, her frustration clear. And what happens if it goes south? What happens if you don't come back? Liv paused, her expression softening. Dana, I need you to trust me. I'll be careful. But I have to do this. If we don't take this chance, we might never get another one. Dana sighed heavily, but she didn't argue further. Fine. But if you're not back in 2 hours, I'm sending every officer in the precinct after you. Got it? Got it, Liv said, giving her a small, grateful smile before heading out. The drive to the factory was tense, the city lights giving way to darkness as she ventured farther from civilization. The factory loomed ahead, its silhouette sharp against the night sky. Liv parked a short distance away and approached on foot, her gun holstered but ready. The air was thick with tension as she stepped inside, her footsteps echoing loudly in the cavernous space. The factory was empty, its walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning every shadow for movement. Detective Hayes, the distorted voice called out, echoing through the space. Liv turned toward the sound, her hand instinctively brushing against her weapon. I'm here, she said, her voice steady. Let's talk. A figure stepped out of the shadows, their face obscured by a mask. They stood several feet away, their posture relaxed but their presence radiating danger. You're braver than I expected, the figure said, their voice still modulated. Or maybe just more reckless. Maybe both, Liv replied. But I'm here. So, start talking. What is Kingfisher? The figure tilted their head, as if considering her question. Kingfisher is inevitable. You can't stop it, detective. You can't even begin to understand it. But I'll give you this, Morrison wasn't lying. He's just a pawn. Like you. Liv's eyes narrowed. I'm no pawn. Everyone's a pawn, the figure said, taking a step closer. The difference is, I know it. You don't. Before Liv could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside broke the tension. The figure glanced toward the noise, then back at Liv. Looks like our time is up, they said. Until next time, detective. And with that, they disappeared into the shadows. Liv raced after them, her heart pounding, but by the time she reached the exit, they were gone. All that was left was the echo of their words, and the chilling realization that this was far from over. The screech of tires faded into the night, leaving Liv standing in the cold, empty factory, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her flashlight cut across the shadows, but there was no sign of the figure who had just been standing before her. They had vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving behind nothing but cryptic words and an overwhelming sense of foreboding. For a moment, Liv stood still, trying to piece together what had just happened. The figure's voice, distorted and detached, echoed in her mind. Kingfisher is inevitable. The way they'd spoken, with a mixture of smug superiority and veiled menace, told her one thing: whoever they were, they believed they were untouchable. But Liv didn't believe in untouchable. Everyone, no matter how powerful, left a trail. And she was determined to find it. She stepped outside into the biting night air, scanning the perimeter for any sign of the vehicle that had interrupted the meeting. The faint smell of burnt rubber lingered in the air, but there was no sign of movement. It was as if the factory had swallowed her leads whole. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She answered it without looking at the screen, knowing it would be Dana. Liv. Dana's voice was a mix of relief and panic. Are you okay? You've been gone for almost 2 hours. What happened? I'm fine, Liv said, though her voice betrayed her frustration. But they got away. There was someone here, someone tied to Kingfisher. They wanted to talk, but the second they heard anything outside, they bolted. Did you get anything useful? Dana asked, her tone cautious. They confirmed what Morrison said, Liv replied, walking back to her car. Morrison's just a pawn, and Kingfisher is bigger than I thought. But they also implied something else, something more dangerous. Whoever's running this doesn't just think they're untouchable. They think they're inevitable. Dana was silent for a moment, digesting Liv's words. That's not exactly comforting. No, it's not, Liv admitted, sliding into the driver's seat. But it gives us a better picture of what we're dealing with. This isn't just a trafficking ring. It's a network. A system. And whoever's at the top has been running it for long enough to think they can't be stopped. There was another pause before Dana asked, so what's the next move? I need you to run a full search on Morrison's connections again, Liv said. I want to know everyone he's ever worked with, even if it seems irrelevant. Start with the financials, follow the money. If this is as big as it seems, someone is bankrolling it. Maybe we can find a crack in their armor. Got it, Dana said, her fingers already typing in the background. And you? What are you going to do? Liv stared out at the empty street, her jaw tightening. I'm going to dig deeper into this location. Whoever called me here wanted me to see something, or at least to know they're willing to engage. They're playing a game, Dana, and I need to figure out the rules. You're not going back in there alone, are you? Dana asked, her voice sharp with concern. No, Liv said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'm heading back to the precinct first. I need to regroup. Good, Dana said with a sigh of relief. Don't go rogue on me, Liv. I can't cover for you if you do. Liv gave a small, humorless laugh. I'll keep that in mind. She ended the call and started the car, the engine's low rumble breaking the silence. As she drove back toward the city, her mind raced with possibilities. The figure's voice, their words, the calculated way they had chosen to reveal themselves, it all pointed to one thing: this wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. But why? Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was subdued. Most of the night shift had settled into their routines, the hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone filling the air. Liv walked straight to Dana's desk, where her friend was already surrounded by screens, each one displaying lines of code or financial spreadsheets. "Tell me you've got something," Liv said, leaning over the desk. Dana glanced up, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "Maybe. I've been tracing Morrison's financial transactions again, and I found something weird. He's been funneling money into offshore accounts for years, but there's one account that stands out. It's not just receiving funds, it's distributing them. And not just to people we've already linked to the trafficking operation." "Go on," Liv said, her brow furrowing. Dana turned one of the screens toward her, pointing to a series of transactions. "This account has been paying out to legitimate businesses, law firms, security companies, even political campaigns. It's like they're trying to legitimize the money. But here's the kicker, one of the businesses, a consulting firm, is registered under the name Kingfisher Holdings." Liv's breath caught. "They're laundering the money." "Exactly," Dana said. "And they're doing it so well that it would have gone unnoticed if we weren't looking for it. Whoever's behind this has connections everywhere. They're using the system to hide in plain sight." Liv's mind raced as she processed the information. Kingfisher wasn't just a code name or a figurehead, it was a machine. A well-oiled, meticulously constructed network designed to exploit and evade. And if they had ties to legitimate businesses and politicians, then they were more powerful than she'd imagined. "Do we have a name?" Liv asked, her voice urgent. Dana shook her head. "Not yet. But I'm working on it. If I can trace the shell companies back to their source, we might get lucky." Liv nodded, her jaw set. "Keep at it. I'll start looking into the consulting firm. If they're tied to Kingfisher, someone there knows more than they're letting on." As Dana returned to her work, Liv stepped away, her mind churning with possibilities. Kingfisher Holdings was her next target, but she knew she couldn't approach it head-on. If they were as connected as they seemed, they'd know she was coming the moment she made a move. She needed to be smart, careful, and most of all, relentless. Because no matter how deep this went, no matter how powerful Kingfisher seemed, Liv Hayes wasn't going to stop until she brought them crashing down. The early hours of the morning found Liv sitting alone in the precinct's break room, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee while the weight of the case pressed heavily on her. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her, and the world outside was still cloaked in darkness. She'd barely slept in days, but rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, not while Kingfisher's shadow loomed so large. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her train of thought. She glanced at the screen and saw a text from Dana, "I've got something. Come to my desk." Liv didn't hesitate. She pushed herself up and walked briskly through the quiet precinct, her tiredness momentarily forgotten. Dana was hunched over her desk, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her monitors. She looked up as Liv approached, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "What is it?" Liv asked, pulling up a chair beside her. Dana gestured to one of her screens, which displayed a series of documents and spreadsheets. "Okay, so I've been digging deeper into the transactions tied to Kingfisher Holdings. It wasn't easy, but I managed to trace one of their payments to a specific recipient, a private security firm called Haven Tactical Solutions. On paper, it looks like a legitimate company, but get this, Haven's headquarters is in the same building as one of the shell companies Morrison used." Liv leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the information on the screen. "So they're not just laundering money, they're using Haven as a front." "Exactly," Dana said, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pulled up more details. "And here's where it gets interesting. Haven's CEO is a guy named Richard Vale. Former military, dishonorably discharged for reasons that are conveniently redacted in his file. After that, he disappeared from the public eye for a few years before resurfacing as the head of Haven Tactical Solutions." "Vale," Liv repeated, the name rolling uneasily off her tongue. "What else do we know about him?" "Not much," Dana admitted. "He's a ghost. No social media, no interviews, no public appearances. But there's a rumor that he's connected to several private contracts overseas, some of which have ties to human trafficking operations. Liv's jaw tightened as the pieces began to fall into place. So Vale could be one of the people running Kingfisher. Dana nodded. It's possible. At the very least, he's a major player. And if we can connect him to the trafficking network, we might be able to take down a significant part of the operation. Liv straightened, her determination hardening. Where's Haven's headquarters? Dana clicked a few keys, pulling up a map. Downtown. It's a high-rise, heavily guarded. If you're planning on going there, you'll need more than just a badge. Liv smirked grimly. When has that ever stopped me? By mid-morning, Liv was standing outside the sleek glass building that housed Haven Tactical Solutions. The sun had risen, casting long shadows across the city streets, but the brightness did little to ease the tension simmering in her chest. She adjusted her blazer, her badge clipped to her belt, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The lobby was pristine, with polished marble floors and modern decor. A security desk sat at the center, manned by a stern-looking guard who eyed Liv warily as she approached. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, his tone cautious. Liv pulled out her badge and held it up. "Detective Hayes, Major Crimes Unit. I need to speak with Richard Vale." The guard's expression didn't change. "Do you have an appointment?" "This isn't the kind of visit you schedule," Liv said flatly. "I'm conducting an investigation, and I need to speak with him now." The guard hesitated, glancing at a monitor on his desk. "Wait here," he said finally, picking up a phone and speaking in hushed tones. Liv's eyes wandered the lobby as she waited, noting the security cameras positioned in every corner and the discreet earpieces worn by several employees who passed by. This wasn't just a corporate office, it was a fortress. After a few tense minutes, the guard hung up the phone and looked at her. "Mr. Vale will see you," he said, though his tone suggested that this was more of an inconvenience than a courtesy. "Take the elevator to the 18th floor." Liv nodded and headed toward the elevator, her heart pounding as she prepared for whatever lay ahead. She didn't know what to expect from Vale, but she knew one thing: he wouldn't make this easy. The 18th floor was a stark contrast to the bustling lobby below. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with thick carpeting that muffled her footsteps and a minimalist design that felt cold and impersonal. A receptionist greeted her with a polite but guarded smile and led her to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Richard Vale was already seated behind a sleek black desk, his sharp suit and neatly combed hair giving him an air of authority. He looked up as Liv entered, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers with a calculated intensity. "Detective Hayes," he said, his voice calm and measured. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Liv stepped forward, her posture straight and her expression unreadable. "Mr. Vale, I'm investigating a trafficking operation, and your company's name has come up. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Vale leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Of course. But I must say, I find it curious that my company would be implicated in such a thing. Haven Tactical Solutions provides security services to high-profile clients. We have nothing to do with unsavory activities." Liv's gaze didn't waver. "We've traced payments from shell companies tied to a trafficking network to accounts associated with Haven. Care to explain?" Vale's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened ever so slightly. "Detective, I can assure you that any financial transactions involving my company are entirely above board. If there's been a misunderstanding, I'll be happy to provide my accountant's contact information." Liv took a step closer, her voice firm. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Vale. Either you're directly involved, or someone in your company is. And I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Vale's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard expression. He stood, his imposing frame towering over the desk as he leaned forward. "Detective, I don't appreciate being accused of crimes I didn't commit. If you have evidence, I suggest you present it. Otherwise, this conversation is over." Liv stared him down, refusing to blink. She could feel the tension crackling in the air between them, but she didn't back down. "Don't worry," she said coolly. "I'll get the evidence. And when I do, I'll be back." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the office, her heart racing. She knew Vale was hiding something. His carefully controlled demeanor had cracked, if only for a moment. But she needed more than suspicion to take him down. As she stepped into the elevator, Liv pulled out her phone and called Dana. "I need you to dig deeper into Haven Tactical Solutions," she said as the doors closed. "I don't care how far you have to go, find me something that ties Vale to Kingfisher." "I'm on it," Dana replied without hesitation. Liv hung up and leaned against the elevator wall, her mind racing. She was getting closer, she could feel it. But the closer she got, the more dangerous this game became. And if Vale was involved, then Kingfisher's reach extended higher than she'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about taking down a trafficking ring anymore. It was about exposing a system, a network of power and corruption that thrived in the shadows. And Liv Hayes was about to drag it into the light. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, but Liv's mind was anything but quiet. Richard Vale's face, calm and composed yet brimming with veiled menace, was burned into her thoughts. He was hiding something, she was certain of it. His confidence wasn't just arrogance, it was the kind of self-assuredness that came from knowing you were protected. Vale wasn't just a thread in the web of Kingfisher, he might be one of the architects of the entire operation. When the elevator doors slid open, Liv walked briskly through the lobby, ignoring the curious gaze of the security guard she had dealt with earlier. She stepped outside, the warmth of the sun doing little to ease the chill that had settled in her chest. Her phone buzzed again. It was Dana. "Tell me you've got something," Liv said as she answered. Dana's voice was tense. "Liv, I looked deeper into Haven Tactical Solutions like you asked. And I found something, a contract logged under a subsidiary of Haven. It's for a private compound in upstate New York. The contract's vague, but it mentions specialized logistics and a secured perimeter." Liv frowned. "A compound? What kind of operation are they running out there?" "That's the thing," Dana replied. "The location doesn't show up on any satellite maps. No official designation, no public record. It's like it doesn't exist. But based on the financials tied to the contract, it's big. They've poured millions into this place over the past 5 years." Liv's grip on the phone tightened. Could it be tied to the trafficking network? "It's possible," Dana said. "If they're using it as a holding site or a transfer hub, it would explain why they've gone to such lengths to keep it hidden. I'm working on narrowing down the exact location, but I need more time." Liv's mind raced. If this compound was connected to Kingfisher, it could be the break they needed. But the idea of waiting felt unbearable. Every second wasted was another second that victims were suffering. "Send me everything you have on it," Liv said. "Addresses, coordinates, whatever you've got." "Liv, wait," Dana said, her voice laced with concern. "You're not thinking about going there alone, are you? We don't know what's out there. It could be heavily guarded, or worse." "I'll take backup," Liv said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. "Just give me the information." Dana sighed. "Fine. I'll send it over. But promise me you won't do anything reckless." Liv didn't respond. She ended the call and climbed into her car, the weight of the case pressing heavily on her shoulders. She stared at her phone as Dana's email came through, detailing everything she'd found about the mysterious compound. Coordinates, financial records, even a list of equipment purchases, all pointing to something big and dangerous. Liv punched the coordinates into her car's GPS. The compound was a 2-hour drive north, nestled deep in the woods. Remote. Isolated. The perfect place to hide something, or someone. The drive was tense, every mile bringing Liv closer to what felt like the heart of the operation. The city's skyline faded into the distance, replaced by winding roads and dense forests. She kept her hand close to her radio, debating whether to call for official backup. But the truth was, she didn't trust anyone else to handle this. Not yet. If the compound was connected to Kingfisher, there was no telling how far their influence reached and how many people in law enforcement might already be compromised. As she approached the coordinates, the road narrowed into little more than a dirt path. Liv parked her car in a small clearing, out of sight, and continued on foot. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the crunch of her boots on the undergrowth and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The compound came into view suddenly, its perimeter marked by tall chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Beyond the fence, Liv could see several low, windowless buildings, their metal siding glinting faintly in the sunlight. Cameras were mounted on poles at regular intervals, their lenses sweeping the area in slow, deliberate arcs. She crouched behind a thick cluster of bushes, her heart pounding as she surveyed the scene. There were guards, at least 4 of them, patrolling the perimeter, each armed with military-grade rifles. This wasn't just a holding site. It was a fortress. Liv pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos, documenting the guards, the buildings, and the layout of the compound. She needed to get closer, but every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. She wasn't equipped for a full-scale operation, and if she was caught, there'd be no one to bail her out. Still, she wasn't about to leave empty-handed. If she could find a weak spot in the security or catch a glimpse of what they were hiding inside, it might be enough to build a case and to convince her superiors to take action. She moved carefully along the fence line, staying low and out of sight. The guards' movements were precise, almost robotic, as they followed a set patrol route. Liv's sharp eyes caught a small gap in the fencing near the back of the compound, where a tree had fallen and bent the metal slightly out of place. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She waited for the nearest guard to pass, then slipped through the gap, her breath hitching as the razor wire snagged her jacket. She froze, her pulse pounding in her ears, but when no alarm sounded, she exhaled and continued forward. The air inside the compound was heavy, tinged with the acrid smell of fuel and something else, something metallic and faintly rotten. Liv crept toward one of the buildings, her footsteps silent on the packed dirt. She pressed herself against the wall, peering around the corner to make sure the coast was clear. Through a partially open door, she caught a glimpse of what lay inside, rows of metal crates, stacked high and marked with coded labels. Each crate was padlocked, and a clipboard hung on the wall nearby, listing their contents in cryptic shorthand. Liv's stomach churned. This wasn't just a storage facility, it was a hub. Whatever was in those crates was being moved and distributed, likely as part of Kingfisher's operation. She pulled out her phone again, snapping photos of the crates and the clipboard. But before she could move closer, a voice behind her froze her in place. "You're not supposed to be here." Liv turned slowly, her hand hovering near her holstered firearm. One of the guards stood a few feet away, his rifle raised and his expression cold. For a split second, Liv considered her options. She could try to talk her way out of this, but the guard didn't look like the kind of man who was open to negotiation. She could go for her gun, but she was outmatched and outnumbered. Instead, she took a slow step back, her mind racing. "I think you know why I'm here," she said evenly, trying to buy herself time. "And I think you know what I've already seen." The guard's eyes narrowed, his finger twitching near the trigger. "Doesn't matter. You won't be leaving." Before he could act, a sound cut through the tension, the distant roar of an engine, growing louder by the second. Both Liv and the guard turned toward the noise as a black SUV barreled through the compound's gates, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Liv didn't wait to see what would happen next. She bolted, weaving between the buildings as shouts erupted behind her. She could hear the guards moving, their footsteps pounding against the dirt, but she didn't look back. Adrenaline surged through her as she sprinted toward the gap in the fence, her only chance at escape. She reached the tree and threw herself through the opening, the razor wire tearing at her sleeve. She hit the ground hard but scrambled to her feet, running blindly into the forest. The shouts grew fainter as she put distance between herself and the compound, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When she finally reached her car, she collapsed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she fumbled to start the engine. She sped away, her mind racing as fast as her heart. She'd gotten out alive, but she knew one thing for certain: Kingfisher wasn't just an operation. It was a war machine. And Liv had just stepped into the battlefield. She grabbed her phone and called Dana, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "Dana, I need the team ready. I've got photos, evidence, everything we need to move on this place. But we need to act fast. They know I was there." Dana's response was immediate. "I'll pull the files and get the warrant started. But Liv, be careful. If they know you're onto them, they'll come for you." "They can try," Liv said, her jaw tightening. "But I'm not backing down." As she hung up and drove back toward the city, one thought consumed her: she was closer than ever to Kingfisher's heart. And she wasn't stopping until she ripped it out. The drive back to the city felt longer than it should have, each mile dragging under the weight of what Liv had seen. Her knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her mind replaying the events at the compound, the guards, the crates, the chilling certainty that she had only scratched the surface of something far more sinister than she'd imagined. When she reached the precinct, the sun was already climbing higher in the sky, casting harsh light over the building's facade. Liv stepped out of her car, her legs stiff and her body aching from the chase. She clutched the folder of photos she'd printed from her phone at a nearby kiosk, her evidence feeling simultaneously like a lifeline and a loaded gun. Inside, the precinct buzzed with the usual chaos of the morning shift. Phones rang, officers shuffled between desks, and the faint murmur of conversations filled the air. But Liv's focus was singular as she made her way to Dana's desk, where her friend was already waiting with her laptop open and several files spread out in front of her. Dana looked up as Liv approached, her brows knitting together when she saw the state of her. "You look like hell," she said, her tone half joking but layered with concern. "Thanks," Liv replied dryly, dropping the folder onto Dana's desk. "Take a look. This is what I found at the compound." Dana opened the folder and began flipping through the photos, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "Jesus, Liv," she muttered, her eyes lingering on the image of the crates. "This confirms it. They're moving something big. These codes," she pointed at the labels on the crates in one of the photos, "they're logistics tags. They're used to track shipments, usually internationally. If we can figure out what these codes mean, we might be able to trace where these crates are going or where they've been." Liv nodded, leaning over the desk. "I also got a look at a clipboard with some sort of inventory list. The shorthand didn't make much sense to me, but it has to be important. Do we have anyone who can decode this?" Dana pulled up her email and forwarded the photos to the forensic team. "I'll get them working on it right away. But Liv, this isn't just evidence anymore. If they know you were there, they'll tighten their security. You've kicked the hornet's nest." "I didn't have a choice," Liv said, her voice edged with frustration. "We needed something concrete to tie them to Kingfisher, and now we have it. Are you done tracking the compound's funding yet? Any new leads?" Dana hesitated, glancing at her laptop. "I found more payments tied to Haven Tactical Solutions, but here's the kicker: some of those payments trace back to government contracts. Not just local either. Federal. It's all buried under layers of shell companies, but the money goes to defense contractors, private security firms, and even a couple of nonprofits that specialize in humanitarian aid." Liv's stomach churned. "You're telling me Kingfisher has ties to federal funding?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Dana said grimly. "If this is true, it means some very powerful people are either in on this or turning a blind eye. Either way, it makes this a hell of a lot more dangerous. If we move too fast or go after the wrong people, we could blow the whole case, or worse." Liv ran a hand through her hair, trying to process the sheer scale of what they were up against. Kingfisher wasn't just a trafficking network. It was embedded in the system, protected by layers of bureaucracy and corruption. "We don't have time to play it safe," Liv said finally. "We need to act before they bury everything." What's the status on the warrant for the compound? Dana hesitated. I sent it up the chain, but it's going to take time. With something this big, they'll want to scrutinize every detail before signing off. And if Kingfisher has people on the inside, they'll know we're coming, Liv finished, her voice tight. Dana nodded. Exactly. Liv's fist clenched at her side. She hated waiting, hated the feeling of inertia when every second felt like it could make the difference between saving lives and losing them. But she also knew Dana was right. Charging in without proper authorization would jeopardize everything they'd worked for. Fine, Liv said, forcing herself to take a breath. We'll wait for the warrant. In the meantime, I want all hands on deck. Get the team together, brief them on the compound, and start preparing for a raid. And keep digging into Richard Vale. If he's the link between Haven and Kingfisher, we need to take him down. Dana nodded, already typing furiously on her keyboard. I'll make it happen. Hours passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Liv briefed her team on everything she'd found, laying out the photos and maps on the conference room table. The mood was somber but focused as they discussed strategies for breaching the compound and securing the evidence. By late afternoon, the call came in, the warrant had been approved. Liv felt a surge of adrenaline as she gathered her team and loaded into the convoy of unmarked vehicles. The drive to the compound was silent, each officer lost in their own thoughts as the tension built. Liv sat in the lead vehicle, her hands resting on her lap as she mentally ran through the plan. When they arrived at the edge of the forest, Liv's team fanned out, moving with practiced precision. They approached the compound under the cover of darkness, their footsteps silent against the forest floor. Liv's heart pounded as they reached the fence, her flashlight catching the glint of the razor wire she'd slipped through earlier. This time, there was no hesitation. Go, go, go. Liv whispered into her radio, and the team moved as one, cutting through the fence and slipping inside. The guards were caught off guard, their shouts ringing out as Liv's team stormed the compound. Flashbangs exploded, disorienting the opposition as officers moved swiftly to secure the perimeter. Liv led a smaller team toward the main building, her weapon drawn as they cleared each room with methodical precision. Inside, the crates were still there, but now they were accompanied by something far more chilling, rows of makeshift holding cells, each one containing terrified men, women, and children. Liv's breath hitched as she saw the victims, their hollow eyes and gaunt faces a testament to the horrors they'd endured. Get them out of here, Liv ordered, her voice shaking with anger. Now. As her team worked to free the captives, Liv moved deeper into the building, her flashlight cutting through the dimly lit hallways. She stopped abruptly when she reached an office at the far end of the compound. The door was ajar, and inside, she saw a desk covered in papers, maps, and photographs. And sitting behind the desk, his hands calmly raised in surrender, was Richard Vale. Detective Hayes, he said, his voice calm and measured despite the chaos around them. I was wondering when you'd show up. Liv's gun didn't waver as she stepped into the room, her jaw tight with fury. On your knees. Now. Vale complied, lowering himself to the ground with an infuriatingly calm expression. You've made quite the mess here, he said. But I suppose that's what you're good at, isn't it? Shut up, Liv snapped, cuffing his hands behind his back. You're done, Vale. This operation is over. Vale smirked, his eyes glinting with something dark. You might have stopped this piece of it, he said. But Kingfisher isn't something you can kill. Cut off one head, and another grows in its place. You'll see. Liv didn't respond. She hauled him to his feet and led him out of the office, her mind racing with his words. She'd won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Because Kingfisher wasn't just a network, it was a hydra. And Liv Hayes was determined to cut off every head, no matter how long it took. The precinct was alive with activity. The raid on the compound had been a success, on paper, at least. Dozens of trafficking victims were rescued, crates of evidence were seized, and Richard Vale, a key figure in the Kingfisher network, sat in an interrogation room down the hall. For the first time in months, Liv felt like she'd struck a serious blow against the sprawling operation. But even as she moved through the precinct, briefing her superiors and reviewing evidence, an unease gnawed at the edges of her mind. Vale's words echoed in her head. Cut off one head, and another grows in its place. Liv sat at her desk, staring at the photographs from the compound. The crates, the holding cells, the coded inventory sheet, it all painted a damning picture. But it wasn't enough. Kingfisher felt too big, too insidious to be brought down by a single raid. And Vale had been too calm during his arrest, as if he'd been expecting it. Hayes, Dana's voice broke through her thoughts. Liv looked up to see her friend standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. You need to see this. Liv followed Dana to her desk, where a news report played on her computer screen. The headline made Liv's stomach drop. Explosion rocks downtown high-rise, multiple casualties reported. The footage showed a building engulfed in flames, thick black smoke billowing into the sky as firefighters battled the blaze. Liv's heart sank further as the camera zoomed in on the building's signage, Haven Tactical Solutions. Dana glanced at Liv, her expression grim. It happened less than an hour ago. That's Vale's company headquarters. Liv's mind raced. Casualties? At least a dozen dead, Dana replied. More injured. And here's the kicker, they're saying it was a gas explosion. But we both know that's not true. Liv felt the room tilt as the implications hit her. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. The explosion wasn't an accident, it was a cleanup. Someone in Kingfisher had ordered the building destroyed to erase evidence, tie up loose ends, and send a message. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see an unknown number flashing on the screen. Her breath caught as she answered, her voice sharp. Detective Hayes. The voice on the other end was distorted, the same modulated tone she'd heard before. Hello again, Detective. I see you've been busy. Liv's grip on the phone tightened. You're behind this, she said, her voice low and dangerous. The explosion, the deaths, it's all you. The voice chuckled, cold and hollow. Oh, Detective, you give me too much credit. I'm just a messenger. But I did want to congratulate you on your little raid. It was impressive. Liv's jaw clenched. If you think you can scare me off, you're wasting your time. Scare you, the voice replied, amusement lacing their tone. No, Detective. I admire you. That's why I'm calling. You've proven yourself to be resourceful. Determined. A shark in a sea of minnows. Get to the point, Liv snapped. The voice paused, as if savoring the moment. The point, Detective, is that you've been swimming too close to the edge. And now the real predators have taken notice. Before Liv could respond, the line went dead. She stared at her phone, her chest heaving as a dark realization settled over her. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The precinct felt colder, quieter as Liv walked back to the interrogation room where Vale was being held. Through the one-way glass, she could see him sitting at the metal table, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He looked up as she entered, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Detective Hayes, he said smoothly. To what do I owe the pleasure? Liv sat across from him, her fists clenched on the table. Your headquarters just went up in flames. Dozens of people are dead. Care to explain? Vale raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. A tragedy, truly. But I wouldn't know anything about it. I've been here with you, haven't I? Liv leaned forward, her voice low and cold. Cut the act, Vale. You knew this was coming. This is how Kingfisher operates, isn't it? Burn everything to the ground before anyone can get too close. Vale's smirk widened, but he didn't respond. Who's behind this? Liv demanded. Who's running Kingfisher? For the first time, Vale's expression shifted. His smirk faded, replaced by something darker. You still don't get it, do you? He said quietly. You think you're chasing a person, a name. But Kingfisher isn't a who, it's a what. A system. An idea. And you can't kill an idea. Liv's stomach churned, but she kept her voice steady. Ideas don't kill people. You do. And I'm going to make sure you pay for every life you've destroyed. Vale chuckled, the sound low and mocking. You think you've won, don't you? You think arresting me or raiding some compound is going to change anything. But the truth is, detective, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Liv opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a commotion erupted outside the interrogation room. Shouts echoed through the hall, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Her heart leapt into her throat as she sprang to her feet, drawing her weapon. Stay here, she barked at Vale, though she doubted he had any intention of going anywhere. Liv burst into the hallway to find chaos. Officers were scrambling for cover as masked gunmen stormed the precinct, their weapons blazing. Liv ducked behind a desk, her mind racing. This wasn't an attack, it was an extraction. She glanced back toward the interrogation room, and her blood ran cold. The door was ajar, and Vale was gone. No, she shouted, surging to her feet. She fired at one of the gunmen, dropping him, but it was too late. Through the haze of smoke and chaos, she saw Vale being escorted out by two of the attackers, his smirk lingering in her mind like a ghost. Liv fought her way through the carnage, but by the time she reached the exit, the gunman and Vale were gone. The sound of screeching tires faded into the distance, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the precinct, her chest heaving. She'd been outplayed, outmaneuvered. And as she looked around at the devastation, one thing became painfully clear: Kingfisher wasn't just a step ahead. They were everywhere. And for the first time in her career, Liv Hayes wasn't sure if she could win. Liv stood in the wreckage of the precinct, the distant wail of sirens mingling with the sharp smell of gunpowder and smoke. Around her, wounded officers were being tended to, their faces pale and dazed from the sudden attack. The air buzzed with fragmented radio chatter, but Liv barely registered it. Her mind was fixed on one thing: Vale was gone. Kingfisher had slipped through her fingers again. She sank onto a nearby bench, her hands trembling as she replayed the events in her mind. The raid, the explosion, the phone call, the attack, they had all been orchestrated with surgical precision. Kingfisher wasn't just a network, or even a hydra, as she had thought. It was something far more insidious, a specter that could strike anywhere, anytime, and vanish without a trace. Dana appeared at her side, a bandage wrapped hastily around her forearm where a stray bullet had grazed her. "Liv," she said, her voice strained. "Are you okay?" Liv blinked, finally pulling herself back to the present. She looked at Dana, her face etched with worry, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, though her voice was hollow. "I'm fine." Dana crouched beside her, lowering her voice. "Liv, this wasn't just about extracting Vale. They wanted to send a message. They wanted us to know they can reach us anywhere." "I know," Liv said, her jaw tightening. "And they think it's going to scare me off. But they're wrong." Dana hesitated, glancing around at the chaos. "What do we do now? We've lost our lead, and half the precinct is in shambles. The higher-ups are going to want answers." Liv stood abruptly, her resolve hardening. "We don't wait for answers. We make them." The following night, Liv sat alone in her apartment, the only light coming from her laptop screen. Her desk was covered in papers, maps, and photos, each one connected to Kingfisher in some way. She had spent the past several hours going through every piece of evidence they had collected, searching for anything they might have missed. But the more she dug, the more she realized how little they truly knew. Her phone buzzed, and she answered without checking the caller ID. "Hayes." Dana's voice came through, hurried and tense. "Liv, I found something. I don't even know if I should have been looking this deep, but—" "Spit it out," Liv said, sitting up straighter. Dana took a shaky breath. "There's a name. It's buried in the financial records tied to Haven Tactical Solutions, but it's there. Someone signed off on every major transaction connected to Kingfisher. It's not Vale. Liv's heart pounded. Who? Dana hesitated, then said, Edgar Raines. Liv froze. The name hit her like a freight train. Edgar Raines wasn't just anyone. He was a billionaire philanthropist, a household name known for his work in global development and humanitarian aid. His face was plastered on magazine covers, his name attached to countless charities. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. Are you sure? Liv asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dana hesitated again, then said, I triple-checked. It's him, Liv. He's been funding Kingfisher from the start. Liv's mind reeled. Raines wasn't just part of Kingfisher, he was the head. The mastermind. The man who had built the entire network and cloaked it in the veneer of legitimacy. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was hiding in plain sight. Where is he now? Liv asked, already pulling up her laptop to search for his location. He's hosting a gala tomorrow night, Dana said. Some charity fundraiser in the city. Security's going to be tight, but if you want to confront him. I'm going, Liv said, cutting her off. Send me the details. Liv, wait, Dana said, her voice urgent. If you go after him without backup, without evidence. I'll get what I need, Liv said firmly. Just send me everything you have. The gala was everything Liv expected, opulent, extravagant, and crawling with power players from every corner of society. She had managed to slip in by posing as a journalist, her press pass courtesy of Dana's resourcefulness. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, the air filled with the hum of polite conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. At the center of it all was Edgar Raines. He stood near the stage, shaking hands and flashing his charming smile as he spoke with guests. To anyone else, he looked like the perfect philanthropist, a man devoted to making the world a better place. But to Liv, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. She moved carefully through the crowd, keeping him in her sights as she pretended to mingle. Her heart pounded as she rehearsed what she would say, how she would confront him. She had no official warrant, no backup. But she had the truth, and she was willing to risk everything to expose it. Finally, their eyes met. Raines's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he saw her, but he recovered quickly, his charm never wavering. He excused himself from his conversation and approached her, his expression one of polite curiosity. Good evening, he said smoothly. I don't believe we've met. Edgar Raines. Liv forced a smile. Detective Hayes. Major Crimes Unit. Raines's eyes flickered with recognition, but his smile didn't falter. Ah, the famous Detective Hayes. I've heard about your work. Very impressive. Not as impressive as yours, Liv said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Kingfisher, for example. That's quite the operation you've built. Raines's smile finally faded. He glanced around, then gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. Let's not make a scene, Detective. Shall we talk? Liv followed him, her hand hovering near her concealed weapon. They stopped near a set of glass doors leading to a balcony, the noise from the gala muffled behind them. You've been busy, Raines said, his tone calm but cold. But you're in over your head, Detective. You have no idea what you're up against. I know enough, Liv said. I know you're the one pulling the strings. And I know I'm going to bring you down. Raines chuckled softly, shaking his head. You're ambitious. I'll give you that. But Kingfisher isn't just me. It's bigger than you can imagine. You could destroy me tonight, and it wouldn't matter. The system would keep going. Liv stepped closer, her voice low and furious. It matters to the people you've destroyed. It matters to the lives you've ruined. And I'm not stopping until every last piece of your so-called system is gone. Raines's expression darkened, and for the first time, Liv saw the mask slip. The charm was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You should have walked away," he said quietly. "But now, you've left me no choice." Before Liv could react, she felt a sharp pain in her side. She looked down to see a knife in Rains's hand, blood already pooling around the blade. Her breath caught as she staggered back, her vision swimming. Rains stepped closer, his voice a whisper. "You were never going to win, detective. You can't fight the inevitable." Liv's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Rains walking calmly back into the gala, his mask of charm perfectly intact. When Liv opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling her nostrils. Dana sat beside her, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Liv," Dana said, her voice breaking. "You're alive." Liv tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Dana handed her a cup of water, and she sipped it slowly before croaking out, "Rains?" Dana shook her head, her eyes filled with despair. "He's gone. The gala was his last known appearance. He's disappeared, Liv. No trace, no leads." Liv closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had come so close, only to lose everything. Kingfisher wasn't just a hydra. It was a ghost. And as long as it existed, Liv knew it would haunt her forever. This was the end of her fight, but not the end of the war.